As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller, and I'm wondering if you are ready to lighten up, because my show today is called Lighten Up, Live More, and it's lessons from an ultralight backpacking legend. His name is Glen Van Peski, and I'll tell you what, one of my favorite things about hosting this show is not just being able to be with you, but also being able to interview and talk to all these amazing people who've had these incredible life experiences and are willing to talk about them and share their insights so that we can learn a little bit more and live a little bit more fully. So my show today, Lighten Up, Live More, all about Glen, is just whether you're hitting the trails or you're taking your dream trip, you know what it's like to overpack, or I think you know. I know I do. It's the story of my life. Pretty much every trip I've ever taken, I overpack. And so, but when you carry less, whether it's physically or metaphorically, you have so much more freedom and energy to appreciate the journey, not just the destination. Glen is testament to the take less, do more approach, and he actually wrote a book about it. He is the owner of Gossamer Gear, and he's the author of Take Less, Do More. And his story about curiosity and generosity and adventure is one you won't want to miss. You don't have to hit the trails to take some key takeaways from Glen's lessons, because it actually will just revolutionize how you look at goals and relationships and personal growth. So let's talk about how to simplify your life and how it contributes to longevity and fulfillment. And by simplify your life, I mean packing less, taking less with you, and living more in the experience. So Glen, I'm going to bring you into the show and have you introduce yourself. How are you doing?
Good, Angie. Thanks for having me on the show. It's exciting to be here and talk to your community.
I really appreciate it. I have to tell you all, I only met Glen recently, and he is probably one of the most humble humans I've ever met. Glen has a great story, but you have to pry it out of him. And he's one who will turn the tables, and the next thing you know, you're telling your story. So I'm going to keep Glen on task because he's going to have to share his story today. So Glen, the first thing I want to know is what inspired you to write Take Less, Do More? Because you're actually an engineer by trade. So how did this whole journey into ultralight backpacking start?
Well, you say engineer by trade, and I think, I meet engineers, and it's a way of thinking. So yes, I'm an engineer, and I was badgered into writing the book. That's a little strong, I guess. But my friend John Mackey, who I do a lot of hiking with, he invites me on a lot of hikes, said about 10 years ago, Glen, you ought to write a book, and kept pestering me. He said he would write the foreword, and I finally got around to it.
So you might want to tell us who John Mackey is for those who don't know.
John Mackey, which I didn't know when someone brought his name up to me many years ago, is the co-founder of Whole Foods Market.
Okay. So you and John created this relationship. You do some hiking and some backpacking. And it sounds like John was like, hey, write this book about ultralight backpacking. So he saw something in you and he finally wore away at you and you got it down on paper, which is pretty incredible, right?
Yeah. What finally unlocked it for me was that I could hire smart people to help with that process. And also I got an idea that I could make it a little more than just ultralight backpacking. There's certainly a chapter on that. But I was interested in taking the lessons I learned in lightening my backpacking load over the last 50 odd years, and kind of the life lessons that I've taken from that.
That's what I think I enjoy the most is I'm just starting to, kind of really deep dive into your book, and it's all those lessons and those takeaways. It isn't so much, again, that's why I said in the opening, you don't have to go out and hit the trails. The lessons that Glenn has to share have everything to do with everyday life. So, speaking of lessons, what is one of the most significant? And I know I think you have like 15 lessons in there. So, what is one of the most significant lessons that you learned from ultralight backpacking that truly had this profound impact on your life?
I think one of the most important lessons for me was about creating margin. So my base weight, generally when I'm going out backpacking, which is all your gear, your backpack, your tent, cooking, clothes, sleeping bag, everything, except for food and water and what you're wearing, is generally under 5 pounds. I just got back from 4 days in Immigrant Wilderness, and it was about 5.5 because I had to take a tent because it was super buggy. When you go out backpacking with an ultralight load, you're creating margin. And that margin allows you to do a number of things. One, it allows you to travel more miles. If you have limited time with a lighter load, you can see more. Without the burden of it, you have the ability to see what's going on around you. You can enjoy the lakes and the mountain peaks without just grinding out the miles because you've got a 40-pound pack on your back. It also allows you to notice things that you wouldn't otherwise. The deer poking out around the bush, or the mouse trying to get at your food. Because you're not just totally exhausted from carrying that heavy load. It also gives you margin to help with others. I was on a trip in a slot canyon with my wife, Francie, which doesn't happen that often because that's not her happy place, sleeping on the ground. But her arthritis was really bad, and because she's married to me, she packs light, and I was able to carry her pack on my back and my pack on my front, and probably still was carrying less than most people we met on that trip. So it gives you margin to help others, margin to notice things you wouldn't, and margin with limited time to see more in the backcountry.
It's funny that you said that because I shared with Glenn that a couple of years ago, I went on an REI backpacking trip with a girlfriend, and we decided we wanted to try backpacking, but we didn't trust ourselves to do it on our own. We do camping and all those things, but true backpacking. And they said they too had to have a load less than 35 pounds. Well, there's pictures of me, and my backpack is almost as big as me. And it was 35 full pounds, but I ended up, true story, with the most incredible headaches at the end of the night to where I couldn't sleep every night. And I think it was the burden on the bag. And I was probably hiking my shoulders and tensing my upper traps. And I ended up with this incredible, just pounding headache for a few days. And some of the things that I wrote down that you said was, you can travel further, in that spot on. You're not in such a hurry to get somewhere because you're not like, I just want to get this backpack off. And that means that if you travel further, you see more. And I love the word less burden because that's what it felt like. It felt like I was just carrying a burden. And then you also mentioned that then you can slow down because, again, you want to appreciate it. And so then you're more in the moment. You're more aware of what's around you because you're taking it all in instead of your brain going, get this bag off my back, get this bag off my back. I was totally emotionally hijacked the whole entire trip by the weight of my bag. And it just reminded me of how many times I overpack and it feels like such a burden. So, I'm going to venture to say that when you say that applies to real life, that whole, give me an analogy that you take that into real life, because I've got all kinds in my head, but I want to hear yours.
Well, one is, and it's not backcountry, so it's still somewhat related, but if you're traveling, like overseas travel, we did a trip. We were in Europe for 8 weeks, and it included a lot of hiking. It included kayaking. It included a night at the opera because we have a friend who sings at the Bavarian State Opera. And I did all that with one very tiny backpack through very careful selection of what I had. So, other trips besides wilderness, you can apply it. But I think in life in general, creating more margin of time, energy, and money is something that just gives you so many opportunities to help others and engage in your community and to make a difference when you're not so consumed with your own burden, your own list, and you have that capability to help others.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The whole time, energy, money thing, and just the whole idea of creating more margin, just more margin for joy, more margin for being in the moment, more margin for time and physical and emotional energy. So that makes a ton of sense to me. Is there one more lesson? I know you had a lot of lessons, but is there one more that kind of is one of your ultimate favorites that you like to tell people about that stands out?
I think the main actually creating margin is the main thing that stands out, and there are a couple aspects to that. One that appears to be resonating with a lot of people from the book is in a financial sense. We decided early on in life to set aside in a separate checking account a set amount from all income that we got, and we started low, and now it's a significant portion of our income goes into this separate account. But that allows us to, when we become aware of a need, and again, even just becoming aware of needs, you have to have some margin for that to notice what's going on with other people and maybe they need some help. But having a separate account with money set aside, now we don't have to ask, oh, so-and-so's having a rough spot. It'd be nice if we could help out, but the kid needs braces or the car needs a new transmission. It doesn't matter. We don't have to ask if we have money to help because that's already been created. We just need to decide, does this have our name on it or not?
So it's kind of like saying, I've got all these clothes in my closet. It doesn't mean I have to pack them all to go on my trip. And to the same point with finances, it's like saying I have all this money. It doesn't mean I have to spend it all the time. I don't have to run it. I always say you don't have to run your checking account like you run your gas tank, which is me, which I go full to empty. So I try not to do that with my checking account, go full to empty. And so theoretically, what you're saying is set aside some money and have that be whether it's to help other people out, or maybe for some people it's to take the trip they always want to take. But there's always going to be that extra money, so to speak, that you don't depend on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis. Is that kind of what you're saying with that one?
Exactly. Yeah. Setting the money aside first, because you always figure out a way to live on what's left over. But whatever you want, to the extent that you want to be generous and be intentional about that, having a set amount that automatically goes away into a separate account is a great way to be more intentional in your generosity and giving.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And that's a big part of your book and a big part of your motto, or your model is just generosity and gratitude. I have to pivot for a minute because I cannot get it off my mind, the whole 5 pounds thing. So I just have to understand, right after my whole REI experience and these massive headaches and a backpack that's bigger than me and still feeling like I didn't have enough stuff. I got to know, what in the world are you doing to get your pack to 5 pounds for 4 days? I mean, even if I were to say, well, you're a guy and you don't need as much stuff, trying to figure this one out, because I know that even ultralight tents. So you must not be sleeping in a tent. You did mention that you brought, that sometimes you add a tent, but I'm getting the impression you sleep on the ground. Is that right?
Yeah. So on the last trip, I did bring a tent. Now, it was a tent I designed that we actually sell at Gossamer Gear that weighs 10 ounces. So by the time you add stakes and a ground cloth, you're at like 12 or 13 ounces. So that's a lighter tent than most people are carrying. It was heavy for me, but I knew we'd have the bugs, and I was glad I had it. I've got gear lists and videos of what's in my pack on my website, glenvanpeski.com. But I've spent probably 50 years thinking about how to get stuff lighter and turning my engineer's brain onto that problem. And I could frankly cut more weight out of that. I mean, I can name 5 items right now that I could get lighter in my pack, but I just haven't. If I can keep it to 5 pounds around there, I'm happy with that. And keep in mind when you add food and water, like for a 3 or 4 day trip, I might be at 12 pounds or 13 pounds leaving the trailhead. But some of it's technique, some of it's materials, knowing about super light tents and super light sleeping bags, and some of it's using things that do dual purpose. I was using the chopsticks I was using to eat. Titanium chopsticks were also my tent stakes. The pot that I was cooking in was also my drinking cup, things like that. And then some of it's technique, knowing how to sleep, how to contour the ground so that you're comfortable on a 1/4 inch foam torso pad instead of needing inflatable mattress.
I'm visualizing, and in my mind, I'm trying to picture a 10-ounce tank. I mean, a 10-ounce tent and how that would apply. And I hear you like on the water because you're probably bringing the filter system. And then so when you walk away from the site, you've got more load because you're carrying your water and then you're drinking it throughout the day and so forth. But my mind is stuck on that 10-ounce tent and then getting a sleeping bag that would be light enough, and then your cooking utensils. And pretty much my backpack right now is up to about 50 pounds. So I'm going to have to look at Gossamer Gear and figure out how this all works. So, but I love that you've taken your engineer brain and you've been able to personally apply it to your company and create this gear that allows people who are true backpackers to take less and again, do more, see more. So in terms of this whole simplifying your life, do you apply that in your home, in your way of living? Does that apply to this minimalist approach? Does that apply to your whole life?
Well, that's a good question. I've been married for 42 years, and my wife, Francie, has a different opinion of minimalism than I do. Her thought is, well, if you have the space, who cares? You can keep stuff. So I always say that walking through my house, there would not be enough evidence to convict me of being a minimalist. I have done a much better job of this on my backpacking load than in the rest of my life. Now, I have little pockets in the house here that are certainly more minimal and spare than Francie's pockets of the house, or the rest of the house, I should say. I think there are concepts that have helped. I don't like to hold on to stuff. I prefer to give it away. Whereas Francie tends to think more like, well, we might need that someday. Even though we, probably won't, or we could always get it again. I do have one thing where the minimalism kind of works against itself for me, and that is in gear. Because I always want to go out with the lightest load, I have, for instance, 3 different sleeping bags, because depending on what the temperature is going to be, I wouldn't want to take too warm a bag because that would cost me another few ounces. So I have a number of down jackets that vary in weight and warmth, so that I can fine tune my load for the particular conditions. So that kind of works against my overall minimalism, trying to be minimal on the trail. But I'm happier with less stuff. I think most of us, when we look back at like the great times we've had, the high points in life, it wasn't because of stuff. I think there are a number of studies showing that stuff does not make you happy. And actually read a fascinating book recently, which now I'm going to forget, Generosity, by the TED Talks guy, Chris Anderson, Infectious Generosity. And studies show that generous people experience happiness roughly equivalent to a doubling of salary, which, if you think how happy you'd be if you were suddenly making twice the money, that's pretty significant. But even more significant is studies show that, when you do get a raise in salary, you're happy for a while, but that very quickly goes away because that's just your new income. So the initial burst of happiness bleeds off fairly quickly. But the happiness from generosity maintains. When people think about that like a year later, they're still happy about it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's interesting too, because I just think that that whole giving spirit and that whole being available to other people, just with your time, with your emotional energy, with listening to their stories, hearing them, making them feel seen and heard and valued. I just think you can't put a number on that. And to the point about if your salary doubles, my mind immediately went to, yeah, that joy is only going to last for so long, because what happens is you end up spending what you make, and then you make more, and then you spend what you make. That has nothing to do with what you make ultimately, and in the decisions. It does impact the decisions that you make in life, but there's so much you can do in life that has nothing to do with money. And so much of what you do, yes, the gear is going to cost more, I'm going to imagine, because you're buying ultralight gear, but ultimately the joy that you get from going ultralight and seeing more and traveling further is going to pay off in dividends. I want to just reintroduce you, Glen. So I'm Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm so glad you joined us here today, because we're talking about lightening up and living more. And I'm talking to Glen Van Peski, and he wrote Take Less, Do More. And Glen is an ultralight backpacking legend. He is the founder of Gossamer Gear, and he is kind of the guru on traveling lightly and what we can do and what we can get out of life. And Glen, I do have to say, see Bodhi sitting back there behind me. In my mind, I'm wondering, well, if I brought Bodhi, could I have Bodhi carry a pack? And then some of my weight could go on to Bodhi. But anyway, so we haven't talked about that, the dog backpack. So since this whole, like when you think in terms of enjoyment, and so much of that has to do with kind of solving problems, like how am I going to create this situation where I can go out and travel with less? And so your engineer brain is kind of solving problems. Has that changed, or has your approach in general to life and problem solving changed since you adopted this ultralight model, so to speak?
Well, as an engineer, I'm always looking for the most efficient way to do things. I mean, the other day I was making lunch, and I caught myself. I was making avocado toast on fresh sourdough bread I'd just baked, and there's some mustard, and then there's some Fritos, because you can't have lunch without Fritos, obviously. And that's in the pantry, and the sprouts are in the fridge, and so I was in my mind, I caught myself thinking like, okay, minimal trips. I'll go drop these off at the same time as I pick the next item up, and only open the fridge once, because I'm going to take stuff out and put stuff in. So that's kind of a disease of being an engineer. You're always trying to optimize things. I've learned after 42 years of marriage that wives don't tend to appreciate being optimized. So it doesn't apply to everything. But certainly, and I think in backpacking, there's what I call the fuss factor. There are some things that just aren't worth trying to reduce the weight, because the aggravation is just not worth it. And I have a pretty high fuss factor threshold at a 5-pound base pack weight. I mean, there's stuff I'm willing to do that most people probably wouldn't. But I think that applies to life too. You have to be careful how far you carry it. At some point, you have to be able to say this is close enough, and it's keep in mind the overall goal of trying to create margin so that I can make more impact to the people around me, and not get hung up on the minor details.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. It's funny, the whole problem solving thing. I'm making a smoothie yesterday, and I'm not paying attention. I'm trying to move too quickly. I'm trying to be efficient. I must be trying to solve problems. And I fill a cup of water, and I'm going to pour my scoop of protein in there. And without thinking, I don't even ask me what I was thinking. I take the water and pour it into the entire bucket of my protein powder, my brand new bucket, just completely. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I just do? That was a lot of money. And so to solve my problem, I got out my little popsicle, my popsicle things, my popsicle maker that you can make, protein, pudding sticks. And I proceeded to put it in there and make basically protein popsicle sticks. So I was very proud of my problem solving ability. And I had one today and it tasted like poo, but at least I felt like I was getting some protein and I was solving my problem. So I figured you with your engineering brain would be very proud of the way I solved that problem.
Very nice
So,
save on that. I may say, very impressive.
I needed to save it because I'm still my mom's daughter and you don't throw stuff away. So
No,
there's
no,
got to
no.
be a way to save that stuff. So, this whole curiosity, I feel like so much of what you do, it's not just your engineering brain. You're curious. You're curious about life. You're curious about experiences. I know you're curious about people's stories because, again, you tried to get me to tell my story and I was trying to get your story. So, how does curiosity play into this whole approach to life and adventure and just tell me about how you view curiosity?
I think part of curiosity is creating the margin in your life that you can be curious. Because if you're so caught up in your agenda and your to-do list and all the worries and stuff you have, you can't be curious. You don't notice other people, what's going on. I was sitting in Francie and I were flying back from Amsterdam, I think, a month or two ago. And I noticed a lady, it was a couple, I say older couple, they're like our age. And she was kind of gripping onto a banister and her husband was like massaging her calf or thigh, something like that. So I'm, sitting there noticing. And so as Francie rolls her eyes, I go over there and go, "Oh, you have a cramp." "Oh yeah, it's just terrible." I go, "Here's a couple packets of mustard," and yellow mustard, and they kind of looked at me like, so I go, "Just have the mustard, have a pack of mustard, eat it with a little bit of water, and in 5 minutes the cramps will be gone." And they kind of said, "Well, okay, we'll try it." And 5 minutes later, they're walking by and she says, "I am never leaving home again without some packets of mustard in my luggage." So, if I hadn't noticed, they wouldn't, if I was just on my phone or whatever, they wouldn't have found out about using mustard to solve cramps. So it's having that bandwidth, that margin to notice what's going on around and for opportunities to make people's lives better, even if it's something as simple as handing them a packet of mustard.
Yeah, and I think also just, uh, taking taking the time out to stop and pause and do that and not be in such a hurry. And I do think that curiosity is what keeps us purpose driven. It's what keeps us goal oriented. It's what keeps us wanting to learn and explore. And your whole concept, because I've been doing a couple of episodes now on just simplifying your life. And I have Habitat for Humanity coming in like an hour to do a pickup. And my ultimate goal is to simplify my life, to have less, have less, have less. And I'm always working on that when I'm traveling. And I'm leaving tomorrow for a convention and I'm going 2 different trips. And my mind is already weighing out how much it's going to literally cost me to do a checked bag for 3 different legs of a flight. And that alone is a burden. It's a financial burden. And then it's carrying that huge suitcase everywhere I go. And right away, I feel burden. And it's weird because it's not just a physical thing. It's an emotional burden. You're just dragging a load with you. It's like dragging baggage and stuff you can't let go of in your life. And so that always weighs us down. I like that you have this physical and kind of metaphorical analogy of when you carry less weight, you appreciate more about life. I think that that is a beautiful approach. So,
You should talk to my wife Francie, because I couldn't tell you the last time we checked a bag. And we'll leave home, go to Europe for 2 months, and we each have a small backpack, and she looks good every day. I'll tell you, she's a master at it, and it's she's got some hacks and careful selection of clothing, and but it's so freeing when you have everything with you. When we go through security, we pick up our bags, like, we got it. We don't need to check extra bag when you've got connections to make. You never need to worry about you arriving and your luggage is not arriving because your luggage is right above your head on the plane. Yeah, it's huge, and you have everything you need. That's a lesson, I guess, from ultralight backpacking is, you go out with so light, you get back and you go, wow, I had everything I needed. And it gets you thinking, kind of as you're thinking now, is like, I really don't need that much to be happy.
Yeah. If I really sit and think about it and you go, okay, if I had everything I needed, I'd have my family and I'd have my friends and, my extended family, my immediate family. And I'd be like, okay, we're good. We've got food and water. We've got shelter. We're beautiful. So I have one last question for you, Glenn, before we go. Just in terms of relationships, because I know that you talk about that in your book, and I think that that's a big one. How does the ultralight philosophy, how has that improved your relationships? Just your sense of community, your relationships with the people you care about. How do you take that philosophy into relationships?
In relationships, when you have created margin in your life, you have time and energy and emotional energy to invest in others, and that creativity of coming up with fun ways to show other people what they mean to you. Like Francie and I celebrate anniversary date night, ADN we call it. So we were married on the 26th of June, but we celebrate the 26th of every month because, clearly, me being able to convince someone as amazing as her to marry me is celebrating that once a year is just not adequate. So that's a way of kind of keeping, not waiting for once a year. And then we do something at home here. Every Thursdays, we have Growler Thursday, and our back patio is open, and whoever wants to wanders down the alley with beer or wine or soda or whatever, and sits around and chats for an hour and a half, just creating a space for people to share and enter into each other's lives.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think that just that whole sense of I don't need a lot to be happy. I just need people around me. I need a sense of community. And when I go out and I hit the trails, I don't need to bring the whole house, the whole kitchen sink. I just need to bring a few essential things. And I do think it's probably this constant reminder of it really takes very little to keep us truly happy and full of joy. So, Glenn, I cannot thank you enough. If you would tell them where to find your book and where to figure out how to ultralight backpack.
You can find my book anywhere online, or your local bookseller can order it for you. And probably head over to glenvanpeski.com, my website. I've got tips and tricks. There's gear lists. There's videos. You can see physically what's in my pack for various trips. And there's a resource on there for some things to think about for packing lighter.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again, Glenn, for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing your ultralight philosophy. Thanks to all of you for listening in. I hope that the ultralight simplifying philosophy serves you well in your life today and every day. So we'll see you next time.